I'm Jessica Parker, 23, and I never imagined police officers would show up at my apartment because my parents reported me suicidal after I refused to give them money. The same parents who couldn't be bothered to attend my college graduation suddenly needed $2.100 and turned hostile when I declined. Family relationships can be more complicated than they appear, and sometimes the most painful betrayals come from those who should love us unconditionally. Before I dive into this emotional story of betrayal, boundaries, and unexpected strength, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors and supporters. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where appearances mattered more than reality. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Mom, dad, 2 kids, and a golden retriever named Lucky. But inside our 2-story colonial with the pristine lawn, things were different. My parents, Rachel and Thomas Parker, had very specific expectations about success and achievement, and their love always felt conditional. Mom was a perfectionist who worked as an accountant at a prestigious firm. Everything in our home had its place, including her emotions, which were carefully controlled, unless she was disappointed in me. Her approval was a currency I constantly strived to earn but rarely received. She'd inspect my homework before I submitted it often, making me redo entire assignments if my handwriting wasn't neat enough, or if she thought I hadn't put in sufficient effort. Dad was emotionally distant most of the time, buried in his work as a sales manager, but occasionally he'd have bursts of warmth that made me crave his attention even more. He'd surprise me with ice cream after a good report card, or teach me to throw a baseball on random Sunday afternoons. These unpredictable moments of connection made the long stretches of indifference even more confusing. The early signs of their problematic parenting were subtle but persistent. When I won the spelling bee in 4th grade, we celebrated with dinner at my favorite restaurant. But when I came in second at the science fair 2 months later, I was met with silent disappointment and extra study sessions. The message was clear: achievements were expected and failures were unacceptable. My younger brother Marcus had a different experience. 3 years younger than me, he seemed to naturally embody everything my parents valued: athletic, socially confident, and effortlessly charming. While I was held to impossibly high standards, Marcus's smallest accomplishments were celebrated like major victories. When he scored a goal in his soccer game, Dad would talk about it for weeks. When I made honor roll every semester, it was simply expected. Jessica needs to work hard because she doesn't have natural talent like Marcus, I once overheard my mother tell a neighbor. I was 12, and those words crystallized something I'd always felt but couldn't articulate. I was the family project while Marcus was the family star. I developed anxiety by middle school, constantly worried about disappointing my parents. I became a people pleaser, adjusting my personality depending on who I was with, desperately trying to be what everyone wanted. School became my sanctuary, a place where hard work actually resulted in tangible rewards. I threw myself into academics, joining every club and study group possible, staying late after school to avoid coming home. By high school, I had perfected the art of being who my parents wanted, at least on paper. Class president, debate team captain, volunteer tutor, all while maintaining a 4 gigapascals. I was exhausted and had no idea who I actually was beneath the achievements. My few friends were similarly high-achieving students who understood the pressure, though none had parents quite as demanding as mine. The first time I tried setting a boundary was senior year of high school. I wanted to apply to colleges outside of Michigan, specifically to programs in California and New York. When I broached the subject at dinner, my parents reacted as if I'd suggested dropping out to join a circus. "We always planned for you to attend Michigan State," Mom said firmly. "Your father's connections there will help with internships. Plus, you need to be realistic about costs," Dad added. "Out-of-state tuition is ridiculous, and we won't support financial irresponsibility." When I persisted, showing them scholarship options and housing plans I'd researched, they escalated to more manipulative tactics. Mom developed mysterious stress headaches whenever college applications were mentioned. Dad started leaving brochures for Michigan State around my room and sending me links to articles about the dangers young women face in big cities. The day I received my acceptance letter from Berkeley with a partial scholarship was both thrilling and terrifying. I hid the letter for 3 days before finding the courage to tell my parents. The resulting argument lasted for weeks. Cycles of cold silence punctuated by emotional outbursts from my mother and stern lectures from my father about family loyalty and financial sense. If you go to California, you're choosing to abandon this family, Mom said tearfully the night before the decision deadline. You've always been stubborn and selfish, Dad added. But this takes it to a new level. Despite their emotional warfare, I sent in my acceptance to Berkeley. Something inside me knew that if I didn't leave, then I might never escape. The summer before college was tense with my parents alternating between treating me as a traitor and desperately trying to convince me to change my mind. Marcus watched this all unfold with confused eyes, not understanding why I would choose to disrupt our family's careful balance. The day I left for California was both heartbreaking and liberating. Mom cried at the airport, clutching me and whispering that she was just trying to protect me. Dad shook my hand formally, then surprised me with a brief, tight hug. "Don't forget where you come from," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Call us every day," Mom insisted. "Promise me." I promised, tears streaming down my face, suddenly doubting my decision. Part of me still desperately wanted their approval. Still believed I could somehow earn their unconditional love if I just tried hard enough. As the plane took off, I watched Michigan disappear beneath me, not knowing that I was flying toward both freedom and an even more painful collision with my family's dysfunction. The California sunshine felt like a metaphor as I wheeled my suitcases into my dorm room at Berkeley. Everything was brighter, more vibrant, and full of possibilities. Still, that first night alone in my twin bed, 3 time zones away from everything familiar, I cried myself to sleep. Despite the emotional manipulation, they were still my parents, and I'd never been away from home before. True to my promise, I called home every day that first week. Mom would pepper me with questions about my classes, my roommate, what I was eating, while Dad would briefly get on the phone to remind me about budgeting and staying focused on my studies. These calls left me emotionally drained, yet I still found myself desperate for their approval. My roommate Amber Lewis noticed the pattern immediately. Tall, confident, with a wild mane of curly hair and opinions she never hesitated to share, Amber was everything I wasn't. "You literally transform when you're on the phone with them," she observed after my 5th daily call home. "Your voice gets higher, your shoulders hunch, and you start apologizing for breathing. It's like watching someone shrink." I was defensive at first, but Amber's observation pierced through years of conditioning. She came from a large, boisterous family in Oakland where disagreements were loud but resolved with love and respect. The concept of parents who accepted imperfection was foreign to me. By the 3rd week, I reduced the calls to every other day using coursework as an excuse. My parents responded predictably, Mom with hurt feelings and Dad with subtle reminders about their financial contributions to my education. But 3,000 miles gave me a buffer I'd never had before. As freshman year progressed, I began experiencing real independence for the first time. I joined the psychology club, reflecting my growing interest in understanding human behavior, particularly the dynamics I'd grown up with. I made friends who knew nothing about my high school achievements or family expectations. Lindsay Chen from my sociology class introduced me to boba tea and weekend hiking trips. Ryan Gonzalez from my study group showed me how families could disagree without withdrawing love. Thanksgiving break brought my first trip home, and the contrast between my evolving identity and my family's fixed perception of me was jarring. I dyed my hair with subtle caramel highlights and adopted a more relaxed California style. Mom's pinched expression when she saw me at the airport spoke volumes. "You look different," she said, and not as a compliment. Dad frowned at my new laptop stickers, particularly the one reading Question Authority. "Berkeley is certainly having an influence," he remarked dryly. That week at home felt like trying to fit into clothes I'd outgrown. My parents expected me to slide right back into their routines and rules, while Marcus watched me curiously as if trying to reconcile this new version of his sister with the one he remembered. The tension came to a head when I mentioned my interest in switching from pre-law to psychology. "We didn't send you to Berkeley to study something impractical," Dad stated flatly over Thanksgiving dinner. "The plan has always been law school." "Your plan, not mine," I replied, surprising myself with my directness. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom tearfully left the table while Dad gave me a cold stare. "This is what happens when you move across the country," he said. "You forget your responsibilities to this family." Returning to Berkeley after that break was a relief. For the first time, I could see my family dynamic from the outside, recognizing patterns I'd been too close to notice before. My sophomore year, I officially changed my major to psychology and reduced my calls home to weekly check-ins. Each call followed a similar pattern: subtle guilt about my reduced communication questions that felt like tests of my morality and decision-making, and thinly veiled suggestions that I was changing for the worse. "You used to be such a sweet, considerate girl," Mom would sigh. "Berkeley is making you cold and distant." When I didn't call precisely at our scheduled time, I'd receive multiple texts questioning my safety, my priorities, and ultimately my love for them. It was exhausting, but I was beginning to understand it wasn't normal. Professor Catherine Miller became an important mentor during this time. A brilliant developmental psychologist with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, she recognized something in me during office hours when I kept steering our discussion of attachment theory back to hypothetical parent-child scenarios. "You're not really asking about the textbook anymore, are you?" she asked gently. That simple question opened the floodgates. For the first time, I spoke openly about my family dynamics with someone who understood the psychological underpinnings. She recommended resources, including the university's counseling services, which I finally had the courage to access in my junior year. Therapy was revelatory. My counselor, Dr. Chen, helped me understand concepts like emotional manipulation, conditional love, and how to set healthy boundaries. I learned that the anxiety I'd lived with wasn't an inherent personality flaw, but a response to years of walking on eggshells. My growing insight coincided with increasing financial tension with my parents. After a particularly heated argument about my summer plans to stay in California for an internship rather than return to Michigan, my father threatened to stop contributing to my tuition. "If you're adult enough to make these decisions, you're adult enough to pay your own way," he declared. I was terrified, but refused to give in. I took on 2 part-time jobs, working at the campus bookstore and as a research assistant for Professor Miller. I applied for additional scholarships and learned to budget strictly. The possibility of losing financial support was frightening, but the taste of true independence was worth it. Junior year spring break became another flashpoint. When I announced I'd be staying in California with Amber's family rather than coming home, my parents escalated their emotional tactics. "I guess we're not important to you anymore," Mom texted. "Your brother will be disappointed." "He looks up to you, though. I can't imagine why these days," Dad added. These messages still had the power to wound me deeply, but I was developing stronger emotional boundaries. I sent them daily photos from my trip to show I was thinking of them while still maintaining my decision. My academic success flourished with each step toward authenticity. I was accepted into a competitive honors program and secured a coveted research internship that aligned perfectly with my interest in family psychology. I made the dean's list consistently and was even featured in the department newsletter for my research project on intergenerational trauma, a topic that had personal resonance. By senior year, I was looking toward graduation with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Despite our strained relationship, I wanted my family there for this milestone. I sent formal invitations 4 months in advance, meticulously researched hotels with their preferred amenities, and created a detailed itinerary that included my father's favorite type of steakhouse and time for my mother to visit the preferred amenities. Botanical gardens she'd mentioned wanting to see. Our weekly calls during my final semester frequently centered on graduation plans. They confirmed their attendance multiple times, even sending me a graduation card in early April with a note. "Looking forward to seeing you walk across that stage. Love, Mom and Dad." I allowed myself to hope that this milestone might bridge the growing gap between us. I didn't realize I was setting myself up for the most painful disappointment yet. The final weeks before graduation were a blur of final exams, thesis presentations, and apartment hunting for post-college life. Between academic pressures and coordination of graduation details, my anxiety returned with a vengeance. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, checking my phone to make sure I hadn't missed any messages from my parents about their travel plans. Every Sunday, I'd update them about the graduation ceremony, how to get the best parking, which entrance to use for family with cameras, the weather forecast for that weekend. They seemed engaged, asking questions about the schedule and what they should wear for photos. "Your father bought a new tie for the occasion," Mom mentioned 3 weeks before graduation. Blue and gold for Berkeley colors. These small details gave me hope that we were turning a corner in our relationship. Perhaps seeing my accomplishment in person would help them accept my independence and the path I'd chosen. 2 weeks before graduation, I went shopping with Amber for the perfect dress to wear under my gown. "Something my mom would approve of, but still feels like me," I explained as we browsed department store racks. You're still seeking their approval, Amber observed, holding up a conservative blue dress with a subtle pattern. But at least you're aware of it now. I chose the blue dress, practicing my walk across the stage in the dressing room mirror, imagining my parents' proud faces in the audience. For the first time since leaving Michigan, I felt like perhaps I could be both their daughter and my own person simultaneously. Then came the text that should have been my first warning just 10 days before graduation. Having some scheduling conflicts. Possibly can't make it. We'll keep you posted. My father's message was brief and vague. My stomach dropped, but I tried to stay positive. I immediately called, but the call went to voicemail. I sent a flurry of texts offering to help resolve whatever conflict had arisen. Could they take a later flight? Could I reschedule my celebratory dinner? Should I try to get them better seats? Mom finally responded the next day. Your father is very busy at work. We're trying to figure it out. The vagueness was agonizing. I called twice daily that week, usually reaching voicemail. When I did get through, their answers were noncommittal and frustratingly short. My anxiety skyrocketed as I sensed the familiar pattern of emotional withdrawal, but I couldn't understand what I'd done wrong. 3 days before graduation, I still had no definite answer. I left tearful voicemails reminding them how important this day was to me, how much I wanted them there, how I'd planned everything to make it special for all of us. Please just tell me if you're coming or not, I begged into my father's voicemail. I need to know. The day before graduation, I sent a final text. I saved seats for you. The ceremony starts at 10 a.m. I really hope you'll be there. No response. The morning of graduation dawned bright and clear. I checked my phone before even getting out of bed. Nothing. I tried calling one last time while applying mascara with shaking hands. Straight to voicemail again. Amber found me sitting on the edge of my bed in my underwear and graduation cap, staring at my phone, tears silently streaming down my face. They're not coming, are they? She asked, gently sitting beside me. I shook my head, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. Then we're your family today, she said, firmly helping me into the blue dress. Lindsay and Ryan are already texting me about meeting up for photos. Professor Miller said she'll be watching for you specifically. You've built a family here, Jess. Walking across campus in my cap and gown felt surreal. Other students walked with parents proudly adjusting their tassels or grandparents dabbing tears. I clutched my phone, checking it obsessively until the very last moment when we lined up to process into the stadium. The seats I'd reserved for my family remained conspicuously empty throughout the 3-hour ceremony. I spotted Amber, Lindsay, and Ryan cheering wildly when my name was called Professor Miller, nodding proudly from the faculty section. I managed to smile for photos, focusing on the genuine support surrounding me rather than the glaring absence. It was during the recessional as we filed out of the stadium with our diplomas when the text finally came through. Congrats. Something came up. Call you soon. Mom. No explanation. No apology. Just 12 cold words that confirmed what I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. I wasn't a priority. I showed the text to Amber, who swore under her breath. Lindsay, usually the diplomat of our group, looked uncharacteristically angry when she saw it. That's not something coming up, she said. That's a choice they made. Ryan immediately shifted the focus, putting his arm around my shoulders. Their loss. Now we have reservations at Ches Panisse for your graduation dinner. Professor Miller is joining us and we are going to celebrate properly. That evening, surrounded by friends who had become family, I tried to focus on gratitude rather than abandonment. The dinner was lovely with heartfelt toasts and thoughtful gifts. Professor Miller gave me a beautiful, leather-bound journal with a note about recording my journey as it unfolded authentically. It was only when I returned to my apartment, emotionally exhausted but surrounded by evidence of celebration, that I allowed myself to check social media. There, posted just 3 hours earlier, was a photo of my parents and brother at Marcus's baseball tournament, all smiles in their team colors. The caption read, "So proud of our star player championship, game number proud parents, number family first." The timestamp confirmed what I hadn't wanted to believe. There was no last-minute emergency, no unavoidable conflict. They had simply chosen my brother's regular season baseball game over my college graduation. I collapsed onto my bed, phone clutched to my chest, and truly sobbed for the first time in years. It wasn't just about missing graduation. It was the confirmation of a truth I'd been running from my entire life. No achievement would ever be enough to make them love me the way I needed to be loved. No success would ever place me first in their priorities. That night, through my tears, I made a decision that would alter the course of my relationship with my parents forever. I would take a break from communication, not as punishment, but as the self-protection I finally recognized I deserved. I turned off my phone, curled around my pillow, and began the process of grieving the parent-child relationship I'd always longed for but never truly had. The week after graduation passed in a blur of packing boxes and saying goodbyes to departing classmates. Amber and I had signed a lease on a small 2-bedroom apartment in Oakland, close enough to Berkeley for me to continue my research position while she started her job in graphic design. Moving day provided a welcome distraction from the hollow ache in my chest where my family's support should have been. "This place needs plants," Amber declared as we surveyed our partially furnished living room, morning light streaming through uncovered windows. "Living things that grow. That's always a good way to start fresh." I hadn't responded to any of my parents' messages since graduation day. There weren't many, a couple of generic texts asking if I'd calmed down yet and a voicemail from my mother saying they were disappointed in my attitude. Their complete failure to acknowledge the hurt they'd caused only confirmed I was making the right decision in maintaining distance. My brother Marcus sent one text. "Mom and Dad said you're mad about something." I couldn't even begin to explain to him the golden child who'd never experienced their conditional love from my perspective. Starting my entry-level position at the Psychology Research Center helped establish new routines. I found comfort in the structured days, analyzing data on family relationship patterns, ironically becoming more professionally knowledgeable about the very dynamics I was personally struggling with. My supervisor, Dr. Lewis, was understanding when I occasionally seemed distracted, offering mentorship that extended beyond research methodologies. "The hardest patterns to recognize are the ones we're swimming in," he told me after I stayed late to complete a particularly challenging analysis. "But once you see them, you can't unsee them. That's both the burden and the gift of our field." My weekly therapy sessions became crucial lifelines as I processed not just the graduation betrayal, but the lifetime of similar disappointments that had preceded it. Dr. Chen helped me understand I was grieving. Not just the absence of my parents at graduation, but the loss of the fantasy that they might someday become the supportive, loving parents I'd always craved. "Accepting that your parents may never be capable of providing what you need is one of the hardest developmental tasks some adults face," she explained. "It's a special kind of grief because there's no closure, no funeral. The people are still there, but the relationship you hoped for has died." 3 months passed with minimal contact. I sent brief, factual updates about my job and apartment to avoid complete rupture but maintained emotional distance. Each text exchange felt like navigating a minefield, as my parents alternated between guilt trips, acting as if nothing had happened, and occasional bursts of anger at my continued disrespect. During this time, I reconnected with my father's sister, Aunt Sarah, who lived in San Francisco. We'd never been particularly close when I was growing up, mainly because she and my father had their own strained relationship. Over coffee in a small cafe near the Embarcadero, she provided insight into family patterns I'd never known about. "Your grandfather was exactly the same with your father," she revealed, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "Nothing was ever good enough. Your dad swore he'd be different, but—" She shrugged. "We often recreate what we know even when we intend to do the opposite." Through Aunt Sarah, I learned about generations of emotional manipulation in my family tree. Performances of love contingent on meeting expectations, withdrawal of affection as punishment, and the weaponization of family loyalty to prevent individual growth. The context didn't excuse my parents' behavior, but it helped me understand it wasn't uniquely about me or my worthiness. A weekend trip to Santa Cruz with Amber, Lindsay, and Ryan marked my first experience of pure joy since graduation. Walking barefoot on the beach, laughing as waves chased us across wet sand, I felt a weight lifting. A photo from that day, me with windblown hair, genuine smile surrounded by friends, became my new phone background, replacing the family portrait I'd held onto for years. Just as I was establishing this fragile equilibrium, my parents launched a new offensive: love bombing. It started with a package containing my childhood teddy bear and photo albums. Then came flowers delivered to my workplace. My mother sent emails reminiscing about precious memories from my childhood, carefully selected to emphasize moments of family harmony. My father even called my office directly when I didn't respond to his texts, something he'd never done before. These gestures left me confused and emotionally raw. Part of me, the little girl still desperate for their approval, wanted to interpret them as genuine attempts at reconciliation. The adult I was becoming recognized them as efforts to regain control rather than address the real issues between us. I brought these conflicted feelings to my next therapy session where Dr. Chen helped me develop a strategy for potential re-engagement that wouldn't sacrifice my newfound boundaries. You can open the door a crack without removing the chain, she suggested. Listen to what they have to say, but remember that true reconciliation requires acknowledgement of harm and changed behavior, not just nice gestures. After careful consideration, I agreed to a phone call, but with clear parameters established beforehand. I sent an email explaining that I was willing to talk, but needed them to respect that I was processing hurt feelings about graduation and wouldn't pretend everything was fine. The call was predictably difficult. My parents acted as if the past 3 months of distance had been a mysterious phase on my part, rather than a direct consequence of their actions. When I tried to address graduation specifically, they deployed familiar tactics. We've already explained that something came up, my father said dismissively. Marcus needed us that day, my mother added. You're independent now, but he's still just a boy. He was playing baseball, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my pounding heart. It wasn't a medical emergency or a life event. It was a regular season game, and you chose that over my college graduation. There you go again, making everything a competition with your brother, my mother sighed dramatically. This is why we've been worried about you, my father added. This unhealthy fixation, these extreme reactions, it's not like you, Jessica. I recognized the gaslighting immediately, their attempt to reframe my reasonable hurt as irrational behavior to make me question my own perceptions. The realization was both painful and empowering. This call confirmed that meaningful connection with my parents would require more than I could currently give. I need to go, I said finally. I have plans tonight. Always too busy for family now, my mother muttered. I ended the call feeling drained but clearer. For the next 6 months, I maintained minimal contact, occasional texts, brief calls on holidays, but firm boundaries around my emotional availability. I sent birthday gifts to Marcus with notes letting him know my distance wasn't about him, though I couldn't fully explain the complexity of the situation to a 16-year-old still embedded in our parents' world. As winter turned to spring, I received a promotion at work, moving from research assistant to junior researcher with my own small projects. The accompanying raise allowed me to look for my own apartment when Amber decided to move in with her boyfriend. I found a studio in Berkeley, tiny but filled with light, with a bay window, perfect for a reading nook and small plants lining the sill. For the first time, I was creating a home that was entirely mine, decorated with intentional choices rather than navigating others' preferences. The day I signed my lease, I sent a photo of my new keys to my parents with a simple message, new chapter beginning. Wanted to share this milestone with you. My father's response came hours later. Good for you. Hope rent isn't too expensive in that area. No congratulations, no questions about my promotion that had made this possible. No excitement for my achievement. Just a subtle reminder about money, the lever they'd always used to exercise control. I placed my phone face down on my new countertop and continued unpacking boxes, each item I arranged in my new space, a small act of self-determination. I was building a life based on my values, surrounded by people who celebrated my growth rather than punished it. I didn't know then how soon this fragile peace would be shattered by an unexpected demand. It was a Thursday evening in late October, when my life took another unexpected turn. I'd just settled on my second-hand sofa with dinner and research articles when my phone lit up with my father's name. Unusual, as our communication had settled into predictable Sunday afternoon texts with calls reserved for holidays. Jessica. His voice had that artificial cheerfulness I'd learned to be wary of, the tone that indicated he wanted something. How's my college graduate doing? I balanced my plate on my lap, instantly alert to the deviation from our normal pattern. I'm good, Dad. Just got home from work. Everything okay? Everything's fine, just fine, he chuckled too loudly. Say, your mother and I were just talking about you. You're doing well with that research job, right? Making decent money now that you've got that promotion. My stomach tightened. In the history of our relationship, my father had never shown interest in my financial situation except to criticize or control it. I'm doing okay. The promotion helped. Why do you ask? Well, sweetheart, we've hit a bit of a rough patch. The endearment rarely used, even in my childhood, was another warning sign. There's been a family emergency and we need to come up with $2.100 pretty quickly. We thought maybe you could help out just this once. The vagueness immediately triggered my suspicion. What kind of emergency? Is everyone okay? It's your grandmother, he said after a barely perceptible hesitation. Some medical bills came up unexpectedly. Insurance isn't covering everything. My grandmother Weber had indeed had health issues in the past, but something didn't add up. Which grandmother? And what kind of medical procedure? Maybe I could call the hospital about payment plans. His tone sharpened instantly. Jessica, we don't need you to solve the problem. We just need the money. Can you help your family or not? I heard my mother's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out her words. Dad covered the phone briefly, then returned. Your mother wants to talk to you. Before I could respond, Mom was on the line, her voice dripping with the emotional manipulation I'd become more adept at recognizing. Jessica, honey, I know things have been strained between us, but family helps family in times of need. Remember when we paid for your college applications, your graduation gifts, all those years of dance lessons and summer camps? The familiar guilt tactics washed over me, but now I could identify them for what they were. Mom, I appreciate everything you've done for me. I'm just trying to understand what's happening so I can help appropriately. What's happening is that we need $2, 100 and you're giving us the third degree instead of simply saying yes. She snapped, the sweet facade cracking. Is this about graduation still? Are you punishing us? This isn't about punishment, I said carefully. It's about me being an adult who needs to understand what I'm contributing to. Can I ask why Dad can't use his emergency fund? He always talked about having 6 months of expenses saved. The silence that followed was telling. When my mother spoke again, her voice had that wounded quality that once would have sent me scrambling to make amends. I can't believe you don't trust us, after everything we've done for you. It's not about trust, I tried explaining. It's about, your father and I need to discuss your attitude, she interrupted coldly. We'll call you back. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone, dinner forgotten. Something about the interaction felt off, beyond the usual manipulation. My parents had never directly asked me for money before. Despite their frequent reminders of financial obligations, they'd always positioned themselves as the providers, not the ones in need. I called Aunt Sarah, immediately trying to verify the story about my grandmother's medical bills. Your grandmother Weber, she sounded confused. I just had lunch with her yesterday. She's fine. Complaining about the neighbor's dog as usual, but healthy as a horse for 82. My suspicion confirmed I did something I'd never done before. I began investigating my parents' story. A quick social media check revealed my mother had posted photos just 3 days earlier of a brand new hot tub being installed in their backyard. The price tag for the model, according to the company's website, just under $3,000. The realization that they had lied so blatantly, attempting to manipulate me into funding their luxury purchase, felt like a physical blow. After therapy and months of boundary work, I recognized this as a critical moment in resetting our relationship pattern. With shaking hands, I composed a careful text. After thinking about your request, I won't be able to send the $2.100. I hope Grandma feels better soon. Love, Jessica. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone began buzzing with incoming messages. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. We're not asking, Jessica. We're telling you what needs to happen. You've become so selfish since moving to California. What kind of daughter refuses to help her parents? Each message was designed to hit my deepest insecurities, to activate the guilt and obligation that had controlled me for years. My father referenced college tuition. My mother brought up childhood medical bills. The underlying message was clear: my existence had created a debt, and they were now calling it due. Do you know how much it cost to raise you, to feed and clothe you for 18 years, to drive you to all those activities you wanted to do? My mother texted. The barrage continued until I finally turned off my phone, hands trembling and heart racing. I sat in my darkened apartment, taking deep breaths to calm the anxiety attack I could feel building in my chest. This was why I'd established boundaries. This was why distance had been necessary. I called Amber, who arrived 30 minutes later with Lindsay in tow, both bearing ice cream and fierce protective energy. You did the right thing, Lindsay assured me as I showed them the text exchange. They're trying to financially abuse you now that the emotional manipulation isn't working as well. What concerns me is the escalation, Amber added, spooning cookie dough ice cream into bowls. They're not getting what they want, so they're upping the pressure. Classic extinction burst. I slept poorly that night, my dreams filled with distorted versions of my parents' faces. Morning brought dozens of missed calls and messages ranging from rage to theatrical despair. The final text from my father carried a thinly veiled threat. If we don't receive the money by noon tomorrow, there will be consequences. Don't test us on this. After consultation with Dr. Chen in an emergency therapy session, I decided to stand firm. You're not responsible for managing their emotions or financial decisions, she reminded me. Their reaction is confirming that your boundary is necessary. Noon the next day came and went. I didn't send the money. For several hours, an eerie silence replaced the bombardment of messages. I felt the familiar weight of anxiety, but also a new sensation, pride in maintaining my boundary despite extreme pressure. I was rewriting our relationship dynamic message by message, and though it was painful, it was also necessary. The calm was short-lived. As evening approached, my doorbell rang. The beginning of a confrontation I could never have anticipated. I wasn't expecting visitors, so the sharp ring of my doorbell at 7:30 p.m. sent a jolt through me. Peering through the peephole, I saw two uniformed police officers standing in the hallway of my apartment building. My first thought was that something had happened to one of my neighbors. Miss Parker, the female officer, asked when I opened the door. I'm Officer Martinez, and this is Officer Wilson. We're conducting a welfare check. May we come in briefly? A welfare check, I repeated confused, but stepping aside to let them enter. I don't understand. Officer Wilson, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, explained, We received a call from your parents in Michigan. They reported concerns that you may be in danger of harming yourself. They said you've been unresponsive and sent concerning messages. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My parents had called the police fabricating a mental health crisis because I'd refused to give them money. They had weaponized suicide concerns, an issue never once mentioned in our exchanges, as retaliation. That's completely false, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I can show you our actual text exchanges. There was nothing about self-harm. They asked me for money, I declined, and they've been trying to pressure me ever since. I showed the officers my phone with the message thread. Officer Martinez scrolled through her expression, shifting from professional concern to understanding. This seems to be a family dispute, not a mental health emergency, she observed. Unfortunately, we see this sometimes. Welfare checks used as a form of harassment or control. They asked a few standard questions to complete their check, then explained they would document the false report. Officer Wilson handed me a card with a case number. If this happens again, reference this number so responding officers know the history, he advised. And Miss Parker considered documenting these interactions in case you need to take further steps to protect yourself. No sooner had the police left than my phone began buzzing with texts from concerned neighbors who had seen the officers in the hallway. My landlady called to make sure everything was okay. The embarrassment and violation I felt was overwhelming. My parents had not only invaded my private life but had done so in a way that cast me as unstable to my community. I sank onto my sofa, hands shaking so badly I could barely text Amber. She and Lindsay arrived 20 minutes later, finding me in the midst of a full-blown panic attack. My first in months. Lindsay guided me through breathing exercises while Amber paced furiously, suggesting increasingly creative revenge scenarios that eventually made me laugh through my tears. Once I had calmed, somewhat anger replaced the panic. I called my parents, putting the phone on speaker so my friends could witness the exchange. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice tearful. Jessica, oh thank goodness, we've been so worried. Stop! I interrupted, my voice low and controlled. You called the police and reported me as suicidal. There were officers at my door. My neighbors saw. My landlady called. We were worried, she insisted. You weren't answering our messages. Because you were harassing me about money, I countered. Not once did I say anything about harming myself. Not once. My father's voice broke in clearly on another extension. We did what we had to do. You made us do this, Jessica. If you had just helped your family like you're supposed to, I made you file a false police report. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you understand that's a crime? Do you understand you used mental health services as a weapon? Do you have any idea how wrong that is? Don't you dare speak to us that way, my father snapped. We raised you better than this. The conversation deteriorated from there, with my parents alternating between defending their actions as parental concern and blaming me for forcing them to take such measures. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They seemed genuinely unable to see how their behavior was inappropriate and harmful. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence with my friends. The realization that my parents would go to such lengths, potentially causing me professional harm or worse, was a turning point. This wasn't just dysfunctional family dynamics anymore. This was dangerous. "You need to protect yourself legally," Amber said firmly. "This is harassment." The following morning, I contacted a legal aid clinic at the local community center. They connected me with attorney Diana Williams, who specialized in family law and restraining orders. In her small office decorated with children's artwork, I explained the situation, showing her the text messages and police report. "Unfortunately, this pattern is more common than you might think," Diana explained, pushing her glasses up her nose. "When long-established control dynamics are challenged, some parents escalate to extreme measures. The police check was likely intended to embarrass you and demonstrate that they can still affect your life even from across the country." She recommended a formal cease and desist letter as a first step, establishing a clear record of my request for them to stop their behavior before pursuing more serious legal options. "The letter should detail the specific behaviors you want stopped, the consequences if they continue, and your boundaries going forward," she explained. "It serves both as a legal warning and often as a psychological wake-up call." Writing the impact statement for the letter was one of the most difficult things I'd ever done. I had to articulate not just the recent events, but the pattern of emotional manipulation throughout my life, the graduation betrayal, and the escalation to involving police. Diana helped me keep the language factual and clear, focusing on behaviors rather than intentions. The final letter was 5 pages long, sent via certified mail, so my parents couldn't claim they never received it. The week after it was delivered passed in blessed silence. No calls, no texts, no police at my door. I began to hope that perhaps the seriousness of a legal document had finally gotten through to them. Then the social media campaign began. My aunt called to warn me before I saw it myself. "Jessica, your parents are posting some concerning things about you online. I thought you should know." I logged on to Facebook to find multiple posts from my mother about her troubled daughter and how difficult it is to parent an adult child with mental health issues. My father had shared articles about ungrateful children with pointed comments about sacrifices parents make. They never named me directly, but anyone who knew our family would make the connection. The posts received sympathetic comments from family, friends, and distant relatives who knew nothing about the reality of our relationship. Several suggested they reach out to me to offer support during this difficult time, resulting in a flood of unwanted messages from people I barely knew. Aunt Sarah remained firmly in my corner, even responding publicly to correct some of their more egregious claims. "You might want to tell the whole story," she commented on one particularly melodramatic post from my mother. This led to her being blocked, but not before several family members had seen her challenge. I deactivated my social accounts temporarily on Diana's advice. "Don't engage," she counseled. "Every response feeds the narrative that there's a dramatic conflict happening. Document everything, but don't participate." 2 weeks after the first police incident, officers appeared at my door again. Another welfare check this time, claiming I had sent goodbye messages to family members. The same officers responded immediately, recognizing the situation. "This is becoming harassment," Officer Martinez noted, looking genuinely concerned. "Have you considered a restraining order?" It was a question I had been avoiding. A restraining order felt so final, so extreme, the kind of action that would permanently alter my relationship with my parents. Despite everything, some part of me still hoped for eventual reconciliation, for them to recognize their behavior and make meaningful changes. But as I thanked the officers for their time and closed my apartment door, I had to acknowledge that reconciliation couldn't happen with people who were actively trying to harm me. My parents' behavior had crossed a line from manipulative to malicious, and I needed to protect myself, even if it meant taking legal action against the people who had raised me. That night, I called Diana and told her I was ready to discuss the restraining order process. The little girl who had desperately sought her parents' approval was finally accepting that sometimes the family we choose is safer than the family we're born into. I had just settled into my morning routine at work, responding to emails about our latest research project, when our receptionist called. "Jessica, there are people in the lobby asking for you. They say they're your parents." My body went cold. They were in California. They had found my workplace. The physical distance I'd counted on as protection had vanished. "I'll be right there," I managed, quickly dialing my supervisor Blake's extension as I stood. "Blake, my parents just showed up unannounced. They're the ones who filed the false police reports. Could you—" "I'll meet you in the lobby," he said immediately. When the elevator doors opened to our building's lobby, I saw them. My mother pacing anxiously in a floral dress that seemed out of place in Berkeley. My father standing stiffly in his business casual attire that marked him as distinctly non-Californian. Blake was already there, positioned between them and the security desk. "Jessica," my mother rushed forward as if to embrace me, but I stepped back. "We've been so worried. You haven't been returning our calls, and after that horrible letter." Mrs. Parker Blake interjected smoothly. "I'm Blake Simmons, Jessica's supervisor. I'm afraid Jessica is in the middle of important research tasks this morning. Perhaps you could have called ahead to arrange a meeting." "We don't need to make appointments to see our daughter," my father stated coldly. "We raised her. We paid for her education. We have every right—" "You have no right to disrupt my workplace," I interrupted, finding my voice. "I sent you a legal cease and desist letter. You need to leave." "Is this how you've turned out?" My mother's voice rose, drawing attention from others in the lobby. "Treating your parents like criminals after everything we've done for you." Blake nodded subtly to the security guard who approached. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises," he said firmly. "If you refuse, we'll need to call the police." At the mention of police, my father's demeanor changed. He grabbed my mother's arm. "This isn't over, Jessica. You can't hide behind these people forever." As they were escorted out, my mother's tearful accusations echoing through the lobby, I felt a wave of nausea and humiliation wash over me. Colleagues had witnessed this scene. My professional space had been invaded by my personal nightmare. Blake placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Take the day, Jessica. Go home, lock your doors, document everything that just happened. We'll reschedule your meetings." I spent that day in a fog of anxiety, jumping at every sound outside my apartment door. Amber came over immediately after work, bringing dinner I couldn't eat, and sitting with me as I alternated between panic and exhaustion. The next morning, I discovered my parents had escalated further. They had somehow obtained my colleagues' email addresses and sent messages expressing concern about my mental state and requesting they keep an eye on me. This crossed yet another boundary, from personal harassment to professional sabotage. I met with HR the following day, explaining the situation and providing documentation of the ongoing harassment. Their support was immediate and comprehensive. Security was alerted to prevent my parents from entering the building again, and a statement was sent to staff explaining that any communication regarding employees from outside parties should be directed to HR. Despite these protections, my sense of safety had been shattered. The panic attacks I thought I'd conquered returned with debilitating force. I found myself checking and rechecking my door locks, startling at knocks, screening all calls. During one particularly bad episode, I called Dr. Chen's emergency line, gasping for breath as the room seemed to spin around me. "Jessica, I think we need to adjust our approach," she said, after talking me through the immediate panic. "What you're experiencing now has trauma components. I'd like to refer you to a colleague who specializes in trauma-informed therapy." Dr. Martinez became my new therapist, introducing techniques specifically designed for trauma responses. She helped me understand that my nervous system was stuck in fight-or-flight mode, and we worked on grounding exercises and body-based interventions to help me regain a sense of safety. "Your parents have violated your boundaries in increasingly dangerous ways," she observed during our second session. "The restraining order isn't just a legal tool, it's a concrete boundary that may be necessary for your recovery. The decision to pursue the restraining order fully wasn't made lightly." I spent a week gathering all evidence. The text messages, email screenshots, police reports, witness statements from my apartment neighbors and coworkers detailed timelines of every interaction. Diana helped me organize everything into a compelling case. "The temporary restraining order hearing is typically held within days of filing," she explained as we prepared the paperwork. "The judge will decide based on the evidence whether there's enough cause for a temporary order. Then a second hearing will be scheduled for the permanent order where both parties can present their case." The morning of the temporary restraining order hearing, I dressed carefully in a conservative blue dress and low heels hair neatly pulled back. Diana had explained that presentation matters in court, that judges being human are influenced by appearances whether they intend to be or not. I hadn't expected my parents to appear for this initial hearing, but they were there seated on the opposite side of the small courtroom with expressions of wounded dignity. My mother had clearly been crying, tissues clutched in her hand for maximum effect. My father sat ramrod, straight jaw clenched in familiar disapproval. When called to testify, I described the pattern of control, the graduation abandonment, the financial demand, the escalation to false police reports, and finally the workplace confrontation. I kept my voice steady, focusing on facts rather than emotions as Diana had coached me. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and penetrating eyes, asked direct questions about specific incidents, occasionally consulting the evidence packet before her. When my parents' turn came, they presented themselves as concerned parents desperate to help their troubled daughter, who had fallen in with California influences and become increasingly erratic. "We only called the police because we genuinely feared for her safety," my mother insisted tearfully. "What kind of parents would we be if we didn't try to help our child?" "And the workplace incident?" the judge asked. "We traveled all that way just to see her to make sure she was okay," my father explained. "We were met with security guards and threats to call police. Is it illegal now for parents to visit their daughter?" Despite their performance, the evidence was clear. The judge granted the temporary restraining order, setting a date for the full hearing 3 weeks later. As we left the courtroom, my parents attempted to approach me in the hallway. "This is what you wanted all along, isn't it?" my father hissed, as Diana moved to stand between us. "To punish us, to hurt your mother." "You've made a terrible mistake," my mother added, her voice breaking. "Families don't do this to each other." Security personnel moved quickly to separate us, escorting my parents toward the exit, while Diana guided me toward a private conference room. Once alone, I collapsed into tears. Not of relief, but of grief. Despite the validation of the court, despite the mountain of evidence proving my parents' behavior was inappropriate and harmful, some part of me still ached for their love, still wondered if I was the one who had failed. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation for the permanent restraining order hearing. My parents didn't make the process easy, bringing character witnesses. Family friends who had known me since childhood but had only seen the carefully curated public face of our family dynamic. They submitted childhood photos, school awards, they had kept birthday cards I had made them, all attempting to create a narrative of a loving family torn apart by a daughter's inexplicable rejection. Diana helped me stay focused on the documented evidence rather than becoming defensive about my character. "The restraining order isn't about whether they loved you or whether you were a good daughter," she reminded me. "It's about specific behaviors that constitute harassment and whether those behaviors are likely to continue." The final hearing was more grueling than the first, lasting nearly 3 hours as both sides presented evidence and testimony. The judge listened carefully, occasionally, asking clarifying questions, her expression unreadable. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, she finally said, "I find sufficient cause to grant a restraining order for a period of 1 year. Mr. and Mrs. Parker must maintain a distance of at least 100 yards from Miss Parker, her home, and her workplace. There is to be no contact directly or through third parties, including but not limited to phone calls, electronic messages, social media, or physical mail." She looked directly at my parents. "Any violation of this order will result in immediate legal consequences. This court takes restraining orders very seriously." The gavel's sound was both a punctuation mark to the proceedings and, in some ways, to my relationship with my parents. As I left the courtroom with Diana legal protection in hand, I felt no triumph. Only a hollow sense of finality and the beginning awareness that legal boundaries alone couldn't heal the emotional wounds of a lifetime. 6 months after the restraining order was granted, I sat cross-legged on my apartment floor, surrounded by colorful pillows, eyes closed, focusing on the rhythmic pattern of my breathing. Dr. Martinez had introduced me to meditation as part of my trauma recovery, and though I'd been skeptical at first, the daily practice had become an essential anchor in my healing process. "Notice any tension you're holding," the gentle voice on my meditation app guided. "Acknowledge it without judgment, then let it go with each exhale." My shoulders dropped as I exhaled, releasing tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. This physical awareness was new. For most of my life, I'd lived primarily in my head, disconnected from the stress signals my body had been constantly sending. The apartment around me had transformed, along with my internal landscape. I'd moved to a different neighborhood, partly for the fresh start, and partly because the old place held too many difficult memories. This space was smaller but brighter, with walls painted soft sage green and windows that caught the morning light. Plants thrived on every available surface. Caring for living things had become a form of therapy itself. My restraining order binder sat on a high shelf, meticulously organized but no longer referenced daily. The legal protection it represented had created space for real healing to begin, though the process was neither linear nor simple. Dr. Martinez had guided me through targeted trauma work, including EMDR therapy to process specific incidents like the police checks and courtroom confrontations. We'd also explored the deeper wounds from childhood, the conditional love, the impossible standards, the subtle but constant message that I was somehow fundamentally lacking. Trauma doesn't just come from big, obvious events, she'd explained during an early session. It can also come from consistent emotional patterns that tell a developing child they're unsafe or unworthy. That's developmental trauma, and it affects how your entire nervous system operates. Understanding this framework had been revolutionary. The anxiety, people-pleasing, and perfectionism that I'd always seen as personality flaws were actually adaptive responses to an emotionally unsafe environment. I hadn't been broken. I'd been surviving. My professional life had stabilized after the workplace incident. Blake had become not just a supervisor, but a mentor, helping me navigate the research world with confidence, rather than the desperate need to prove myself that had driven me before. I'd even begun considering graduate school applications, something I'd previously been too afraid to pursue for fear of failure. But the most profound changes had come through the relationships I'd built, what I now recognized as my chosen family. Amber remained my closest friend, though she had moved in with her boyfriend across town. Lindsay and Ryan were constants in my life, showing up with takeout for regular movie nights and texting daily check-ins when they knew court dates were approaching. I'd also formed meaningful new connections. My volunteer work at a community center supporting first-generation college students had introduced me to Jordan Kim, a literature professor with a quick laugh and thoughtful insights who had become an important friend and support. "Family is who shows up," Jordan had said one evening as we walked back from a volunteer session. "Who sees your mess and sticks around anyway. Who celebrates the real you, not some performance they demand." That philosophy had guided my approach to holidays. Traditionally difficult times when family expectations loom largest. Instead of forcing myself through painful phone calls or visits driven by obligation, I'd created new traditions with my chosen family. Thanksgiving at Lindsay's tiny apartment with mismatched chairs and imperfect but delicious food. Christmas morning video calls with Aunt Sarah, who had remained steadfastly supportive despite pressure from the extended family to pick a side. It was Aunt Sarah who forwarded me the first message from my brother Marcus after nearly a year of silence. A simple email: "I miss you. Can we talk sometime? It's just me, I promise." At 19, Marcus was starting to form his own identity separate from our parents, beginning to recognize dynamics I'd seen years earlier. Our first phone call was awkward and halting, both of us carefully navigating the emotional minefield between us. "They never talk about what really happened," he admitted after we'd moved past initial pleasantries. "Just that you had some kind of breakdown and turned against the family. But the stuff Aunt Sarah's told me, and things I've started noticing myself, I don't know what to believe anymore." That conversation opened a door to cautious reconnection. We spoke every few weeks, never about our parents at first, just rebuilding a sibling relationship that had been collateral damage in the larger family conflict. Gradually, he began sharing his own experiences, different from mine in many ways, but marked by similar patterns of conditional approval and emotional manipulation. "Dad's been having these rages lately," he confided 6 months into our renewed relationship. "Mom just goes completely silent when it happens, like she's not even there. It's scary sometimes." Was that happening when you lived here too? These conversations helped me understand that my parents' behavior wasn't simply about me or my choices. It was a multi-generational pattern of dysfunction. Through therapy and extensive reading, I learned about the trauma my own parents had likely experienced, how they were probably parenting from their own unhealed wounds. This understanding didn't excuse their behavior or erase the harm they'd caused, but it helped me contextualize it. They weren't monsters. They were damaged people perpetuating the only family dynamic they knew, unable or unwilling to break the cycle. As the 1-year anniversary of my graduation approached, Amber suggested a ritual to mark the occasion. "Not to wallow in it," she explained, "but to honor how far you've come. to consciously release some of the pain instead of just trying to ignore it. We gathered at Ocean Beach at sunset. Amber Lindsay, Ryan Jordan, and a few other close friends. I'd written down specific memories and resentments on small pieces of paper and one by one read them aloud before releasing them into the waves. With each paper carried away by the tide, I felt something inside me loosening, making space for something new to grow. That evening, I wrote in the leather-bound journal Professor Miller had given me at graduation. 1 year since the empty seats. 1 year of dismantling expectations that were never mine to fulfill. 1 year of discovering that family can be chosen, that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. I still grieve sometimes for the parents I needed but never had. I still catch myself seeking approval or apologizing for taking up space. Old habits don't disappear overnight, but I'm learning to parent myself with the compassion they couldn't give me. I'm learning that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary for genuine connection. I'm learning that I am enough exactly as I am. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that my parents might never change, that they might never acknowledge the harm they'd caused or take responsibility for their actions. This was perhaps the most painful reality to accept, that the reconciliation I had once desperately wanted might never be possible. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do, both for ourselves and for others, is to maintain boundaries that prevent further harm, she'd explained. That doesn't mean giving up on compassion or forgiveness. It means recognizing that true healing can only happen in the context of safety and accountability. I had found an unexpected community in a support group for adult children of toxic parents. Meeting twice monthly in a church basement, we shared stories, strategies, and the particular grief that comes from mourning parents who are still living. The validation of these shared experiences was powerful. The recognition that I wasn't crazy, oversensitive, or ungrateful for protecting myself. As my confidence grew, I began considering graduate programs in family psychology, drawing on my own experiences to potentially help others navigate similar family dynamics. The application process was intimidating, but I approached it with a new mindset, not seeking external validation, but pursuing a path that aligned with my authentic interests and strengths. The restraining order expired exactly 1 year after it was granted. I chose not to renew it. Not because my parents had respected it perfectly, there had been 2 minor violations through third-party contacts, but because I had developed other protective strategies and no longer felt the acute fear that had necessitated legal intervention. The restraining order was a tool to create safety when you had no other resources, Diana explained during our final consultation. Now you have internal resources, support systems, and clearer boundaries. You can make decisions from a place of strength rather than fear. I had no illusions that the expiration of the order would lead to healthy communication with my parents. The few indirect messages they'd sent through family members still showed no recognition of their behavior or its impact. But I had reached a place where their perception of me no longer defined my worth or determined my choices. Looking toward the future, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family before. Freedom. Freedom to build a life based on my values rather than reaction to their expectations. Freedom to form relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Freedom to define success in terms that mattered to me. The $2.100 they had demanded, the catalyst for the entire escalation, now seemed almost comically insignificant compared to what I had gained by saying no. That boundary, painful as it had been to maintain, had become the first authentic yes to myself. It had set in motion a journey toward the person I was meant to be all along. My story doesn't have a neat Hollywood ending. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no moment when my parents suddenly recognized their mistakes and changed completely. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, there was the quieter victory of reclaiming my own narrative, of building a life rich with genuine connection, of finding peace not through their approval but despite its absence. If you've stayed with me through this story, perhaps you've recognized elements of your own family dynamics, your own struggles with boundaries, your own journey toward authentic selfhood. Remember that saying no to harmful patterns isn't selfish. It's often the most courageous act of self-respect. Building boundaries isn't about punishment. It's about creating space for healthy relationships to flourish. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Have you had to set difficult boundaries with family? What helped you find the courage to protect your peace? If you found value in my story, please like this video and subscribe to join our community of people supporting each other through these challenging family journeys. Remember, you deserve relationships that honor your worth, and sometimes the family that truly sees you is the one you build along the way. Thank you for witnessing my story. Your presence here means more than you know.